Welcome back to another episode of BioTalk. I am Chelsea Zimmerman, and with me again is Rebecca Taylor. And in this episode, we are going to talk about cloning. Recently, some scientists in Oregon successfully cloned human embryos to the point that they were able to harvest some of their stem cells. So why don't we just start off with that? You can kind of give us some background, explain what exactly the scientists in Oregon did, and explain the process a little bit.
Okay, well, they did what, cloning, ever since Dolly the sheep, was created. They use that same technique. It's called somatic cell nuclear transfer, SCNT for short. And what they've done is they removed the genetic material, most of it, not all of it, from a donor egg, okay, and then they took the nucleus of a somatic cell. Somatic simply means anything but a germ cell, so no sperm or egg or their precursor. So that could be any body cell, skin, whatever. Mm-hmm. So they took the nucleus out of a skin cell, they put it into the egg that's kind of been emptied out. They give it a shock and makes the egg think it's been fertilized, and so that actually creates then a cloned human embryo. And this has been done, in all kinds of species of animals. It's actually been done in humans before, but this is the first time they've actually, successfully gotten an embryonic stem cell line out of, these embryos. I think they got 6, a handful of embryonic stem cells out of these cloned human embryos. And basically, the guy who was working on this was just trying to fine-tune the SCNT process, and it seems like he was successful with that.
All right. You said this has already been done in humans before. We all know, well, most of us know about the kind of the fraudulent ones that happened in Korea several years ago. But then it was succloned in where was that? I always say California.
StemGen in California, in San Diego.
Was it California? Yeah.
They cloned the embryos, but they just didn't grow very well.
Right. They weren't able to get any stem cells out of them.
That viable stem cell line out of that. So, they're still working on this. Mm-hmm. We're really, it's definitely not a point where we can, sit back and relax and because cloning is coming. It's not coming, it's here.
Right. It's here. Yeah, I remember back it was only just 2006 when in Missouri we were going through the whole Amendment 2 battle, and when they were trying to and ultimately were successful at enshrining human cloning as a constitutional right. And and back then we were talking about hypotheticals. No human embryos had been successfully cloned at that point. And now here we are just 6 years later. And I actually think the first ones, that was back in probably 2010 or something like that. It wasn't long after Amendment 2 passed.
Yeah, it was in the late decade of the 2000s.
I think I actually have the story up right here. It is that I wrote that story. It was 2009 that I wrote about that.
Yeah, so. I think it was 2009. So this is something that we really absolutely have to deal with. Mm-hmm. I mean, and the problem is, the biggest problem is that we want to obviously have legislation that prevents this from happening. But like what happened in Missouri with Amendment 2, lawmakers are really tricky. And what they do is they lie to us and call a human cloning ban a human cloning ban when it doesn't actually ban human cloning.
Right, and that's one of the things with Amendment 2 is they were actually marketing it as a ban on human cloning when but it only actually banned the implantation of a cloned human embryo. And so this was, and that's the thing, this, back with Amendment 2, this has traditionally been an issue for embryonic stem cell research. Now, obviously, in the past couple of years, we've had advancements with ethical alternatives. Obviously, adult stem cell research itself has been very successful in treating human beings now. Then we have also developed these induced pluripotent stem cells, and which are very embryonic-like in nature. And so we've had these advancements, and so there are many people that are saying, okay, with all of these alternatives, and as difficult as it is, like you were talking about with the eggs, to get to clone human embryos, why are they still? What are they pursuing? What does this mean for the future? Is it still for embryonic stem cell research?
But yeah, it's funny because that cloning paper in Oregon was rushed, and I mean rushed to print, like exceedingly fast, which indicates that this was a huge achievement in the eyes of the scientific community. Like, this was big news. But it wasn't because it was stem cells, pluripotent stem cells that were, quote, matched to a patient. Because that can be done with the induced pluripotent stem cell technology, where you take an adult cell and you kind of reprogram it back to an embryonic-like state without eggs or without creating embryos. So it's kind of it has this, some of the same, you basically get out the same product. You get embryonic-like stem cells that are matched to a patient, but you can do that without using eggs or creating embryos.
Right.
So basically, that achievement, creating pluripotent stem cells that are a match to a patient's already been done. So why was this paper rushed? Because it was rushed because they created cloned human embryos that were growing. That's why it was the cloning of the embryo that was the news. It wasn't the stem cells, I don't think.
And I think Wesley Smith noted, and when I read his initial piece on it, it was the fact that, number one, what they did was they grew to a stage where they could either, number one, harvest their stem cells, or number two, it was at a stage where they were implantable at that point.
Right. Yeah. So, it's the cloning, the successful cloning that was the news here. So if this really was just about stem cells, this would not have been a huge achievement, but I don't think that has anything to do with it. And, the researcher who performed this, quote, feat, insists that reproductive cloning will never happen. It's not possible. He's an expert, right? These embryos will never grow into clone children, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about it. But at the same time, it's like, that's just lip service, I feel like. He might be right, but then again, he might be wrong. I mean, people thought humans could never be cloned. So, we were wrong about that. And I really do feel like if we really think that this is about embryonic stem cells, then we're deluding. We're delusional and naive and putting our head in the sand and pretending like, we don't know what's going on. This is about creating cloned humans. Therapeutic cloning obviously is the greater of the two evils, right? Because the embryos then have to be destroyed. They're actually, destroyed for their stem cells. But, nobody wants this idea either of a bunch of cloned children walking around. And a lot of people, like you have pointed out, think that they wouldn't have a soul. That's the dangerous thing the trap we need not fall into as pro-lifers. We absolutely cannot do that. In fact, I gave a talk on IVF and cloning, and this one very devout Catholic woman came up to me, stormed up to me very angry, and said, "I don't care what you say, clones don't have souls." and I'm just absolutely, there's nothing you can say to convince me. And I'm like, okay, James Thompson, the embryonic stem cell pioneer, has said there is absolutely no way you could tell a regular IVF embryo from a cloned embryo. You can't do it. It doesn't matter how human life is created. Okay, we must assume that if there's a human organism there, that a person resides, right? There is a person there, and anything less than that then gives everyone else license to do whatever they want with cloned embryos or children or people. This is that science fiction reality. And this is what the church has said forever. it doesn't really matter where life comes from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Life is life. Human life is life, and needs to be any human life needs to be treated as a person,
Mm-hmm.
regardless whether
Right.
they were conceived in a dish with sperm and egg, whether they were conceived or whether they weren't conceived at all
Mm-hmm.
and were cloned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Basically cloning is just a delayed twin, right? It's
Right.
fused.
Right.
So yeah, we absolutely have to sit there
Mm-hmm.
and protect and see these embryos for what
Right.
they are, which are human organisms, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore need to be treated with the utmost dignity
Right.
and
In
respect.
terms of reproductive cloning, I mean, what would that be used for in the future?
Um,
Because I guess growing um,
Parts, is that
parts
what
or
you're
whatever,
thinking?
yeah,
Yeah,
or
I don't know if that would ever come to pass. I mean, that was the whole subject of that wonderful book, Never Let Me Go.
yes.
Um, I won't even try to butcher the the author's name, who's Japanese. I couldn't possibly do it. But anyway, yeah, this idea that we would grow clones to then be as spare parts
Right.
for us. I don't think that's what it would come down to. I don't even think we'd go there. I think it would just be an infertility treatment.
Right. That's what I. That's
That's
what I would
that
think.
absolutely. And it would be not even an infertility. It would start out as an infertility treatment, and then it would just be for anybody who just has a gigantic ego and is
And
so
bank account.
vain that they absolutely can't abide by the fact that their DNA dies out. you
Right.
know, their exact DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, this is something very, very
So we're going
plausible.
to talk about then. I mean, we've talked about this. I mean, we had a whole kind of episode on, the fact that we don't have the legislation in place
Right,
to protect not just the women but the embryos from
right.
being uh, created and that kind of thing. And we don't have any kind of bans on any of this research, even reproductive cloning, not on
No,
a federal level.
not
Some
on a.
states, I think some states
Some
might
states
have
do. Yeah, but
some,
yeah,
but
some New Jersey does. There's a handful that have addressed this, and some of them.
well, even Missouri, they do have therapeutic cloning enshrined in their constitution, but they did stop it at reproductive cloning
reproductive
for
cloning.
whatever. But
Yeah.
you wrote an article recently about what we do have in
Yes.
place, and let's just kind of just um, talk about that for a second. Just what we do have in place and the importance of what we do have in place.
Okay. Well, let me set the scene here.
Mhm.
So the Oregon researchers announced that they've cloned human embryos. They have 6 embryonic stem cell lines that they have said that they got,
Mhm.
from these embryos, these clone embryos. And I'm sure there are a lot of researchers who would love to either try to recreate what they've done
Mhm.
or even just take a look and study those embryonic stem cell lines. But guess what? They can't do any of that because they are federally funded by the National Institutes of Health. And the National Institutes of Health has a funding restriction, which says that it cannot fund research
Mhm.
that creates or destroys embryos. Okay? And there's another restriction that says that they cannot fund research where embryos were created specifically for research, which means that these embryos and this process and these embryos and these embryonic stem cell lines are off limits to most of the researchers in this country. Okay,
Right.
the only ones that can really work with these that are ones that are privately funded and have private funds working with their research, which is what Oregon has. And then even in California, where they do have billions of private funding, taxpayer funding that's supposed to fund this kind of research, they
Mhm.
can't touch it either because they have a law that says you can't pay your donors for
Right.
their eggs. You can't. So these funding restrictions, while they aren't enough, are
Mhm.
actually doing their job and stopping the flood
Mhm.
of cloning research that this would have sparked. This
Mhm.
would have, I imagine, sparked a huge push in cloning in many labs, or even just looking at these embryonic stem cell lines, but no one can touch them because of the funding restrictions.
Mhm.
So those are important, and I think the point in my article was voting pro-life isn't just about abortion. It's about putting people in place that understand that even just a simple funding restriction like this is a really important tool in, it's like the finger in the dike of, this flood of really horrific research that could be coming in. It doesn't do enough. Obviously, an outright ban would be awesome, but these funding restrictions are really important. And in California, they're trying to overturn that law that you can't pay donors, egg donors for research. And if that goes by the wayside, then guess what? All of the taxpayer funding through Proposition 71, I think it was, will then can go to this cloning thing again. So. These are really important, and we need to focus on the little victories, I think, sometimes, and this is one of them. So yeah, we have to put people in place that understand that even just a simple funding restriction is an important thing.
What are the chances then? I guess I have two questions. Like, how far are we from those restrictions going away? And the other question is, how far or close are we to ever actually getting any real restrictions on this research itself? I think you mentioned something that there was an actual real ban on cloning, but maybe that was a state thing.
No, it was a
somewhere.
federal ban.
Okay.
There's always two bans on cloning floating through the U.S. Congress. One of them actually bans human cloning altogether, all somatic cell nuclear transfer in humans for the entire country. So, and then there's always the fake, usually put forth by a Democrat, and sometimes a Republican too, but usually the other one is the real ban is usually just a Republican. Sometimes there's a Democrat on there, but anyway, there's the fake ban. And the fake ban says, oh, we're just going to ban the implantation or the transfer of these cloned embryos to a uterus for gestation. And that one is super insidious because, like I said, it protects then the therapeutic cloning, which default exploits women. Not just in this country, but all over the world, okay, because they can import the eggs from third world countries or whatnot. So, there's always two of those. The idea of the one passing that bans all STD in humans, I think is, it should be a shoo-in. It should be a no-brainer. But I'm not really sure that will ever happen.
Well, I don't think either one of them are very big priorities for them at this point.
No, they're not. And, so either way, I don't think we're going to get that. As for the funding restrictions, how easily they could be overturned, all that would have to happen is for the U.S. Congress to pass a bill that doesn't have the Dickey Wicker amendment in it.
Right.
So they dropped the Dickey Wicker, which basically says the U.S. government taxpayer funding cannot go to research that creates or destroys embryos. It's just one vote, right?
And they've tried. Have they tried recently to do that, or
I think so, because nobody's passed a budget.
Right.
Hasn't passed a budget.
It's part of the budget bill, so yeah.
It's part of the Appropriations Act, which I believe is. I'm not an expert on politics and how this works, but I believe you have to vote on a budget.
Right.
For this. Right.
It's an amendment onto it.
Onto the Appropriations Act, which I believe is part of budget, right? And I don't, so I don't think that it's in danger quite yet, but people are very vocal about getting rid of the Dickey Wicker. I mean, that is absolutely, everybody who's an embryonic stem cell proponent would like that to go by the wayside. Science and Nature, I think Nature put an editorial that's got to go. A lot of stem cell researchers are like, Dickey Wicker's got to go. It just makes our life more difficult because we have to have two sets of instruments.
And they want it on a federal level because...
At federal level, yeah.
I mean, at this...
They get their money.
Right.
The National Institutes of Health, yeah.
Hopefully we can talk some sense into some people, although it is an uphill battle for us, even within the pro-life movement, to get people on board with this and to just pay attention to it and take it seriously and treat it as something that needs to be addressed now.
Yes. And I would like to remind, the pro-life movement that when IVF came along, we thought it was never possible to create a human being in a laboratory, in a test tube. And even then, it was just supposedly for a good cause for the infertile, right?
For married couples,
For married couples who are infertile. Well, IVF has exploded into $1 billion industry that's creating millions of embryos like they're human waste, just wasting masses amounts of human life, created lost for single moms, for couples who just don't feel like having a kid right now and want to wait till till later on, even though they are fertile. For same-sex couples, it has turned into, I want what I want, be damned,
Well, it's turned into a fundamental right.
Absolutely.
I just read recently that Argentina passed a law where IVF is a federally funded treatment, and it was passed based on the idea that reproduction is a fundamental human right. Have a right to have babies when they want, how they want, whatever way they want to have them, and with no thought to the actual rights of the children that they're creating.
And if people think that this won't apply to cloning, they're absolutely wrong, because cloning activists have already said that human cloning is a fundamental reproductive right, right?
And it's going to be, and that's what it's going to be used for.
It's going to be framed that way, absolutely.
And that's how, they're so adamant that, they're not going to create live human
from this, yeah.
But once it gets repackaged, as a fertility treatment, it's going to be very
difficult, almost impossible. I don't think we'll ever, because once that, Roe v. Wade says we have a reproductive right. Basically, it established this idea of reproductive rights in the Constitution when they're not in there.
And this is the flip side of that.
This is the flip side of that. Either, not only can you not have children whenever you don't want them, you can have children any way you see. Anybody who can really see the writing on the wall sees this and understands that this will be considered a reproductive right. So if we allow therapeutic cloning with this idea that we're just going to ban the transfer of embryos, that's window dressing. I'm sorry, that ban on reproduction is window dressing, because once you have masses of human embryos cloned and available for research, people are going to be asking for that to be for fertility. And that, so this idea that we can compromise and just get a ban on reproductive cloning and that would be good enough is hogwash. That is absolutely a false sense of security, and actually more insidious, right? Because it requires a law that bans the transfer of human embryos requires that they be destroyed, right? So, it's actually worse. It's either an all-out ban or nothing. Because then it gives us a sense of, just a ban on a transfer of embryos gives us that false sense that, oh, we've done something. And now we don't have to worry anymore. Well, it's never going to stem the tide, right? It's a false ban, and it really won't do anything. I don't believe like I've said before, it's window dressing, and it will actually bring about, cloning, I think, as a reproductive thing if we go that route. So it's an all-out ban or nothing, and if we don't do that, then we will have, I believe, reproductive cloning in our future for sure.
All right. Well, I think we're good there. All right. Well, thanks for joining me again, and we will talk again soon.
Okay. Thank you.